What's happening, good people? Welcome to Leadership in Real Life, where we talk about what leadership actually looks like in real time. I'm H-Monét, leadership coach and former school principal, helping leaders balance people, performance, and priorities without burning out. Let's get into it.
Have you ever walked into a difficult conversation with the best intentions and somehow walked out thinking, that did not go the way that I planned? Maybe they got defensive. Maybe you got emotional. Maybe you left feeling like nothing was actually resolved. And the truth is, most difficult conversations don't go wrong in the moment. They go wrong before the conversation ever starts. And today we're talking about why difficult conversations go wrong and how a little preparation can completely change the outcome. So last week we talked about why accountability feels so uncomfortable for good leaders. And if you listen to that episode, you know we talked about something I think so many leaders struggle with. And it's not that we don't know accountability is important. It's that we care. We care about our people. We care about relationships. We don't want to disappoint people. We don't want to create conflict. We don't want people to feel attacked. And so because of that, many leaders delay that conversation. But what about when you've actually had the difficult conversation and it somehow still didn't go the way you expected? Have you ever walked into a conversation thinking, I've prepared for this. I know what I need to say. I just need to get through it. And then 20 minutes later, the other person is defensive. You're frustrated. The conversation has completely gone left. Somehow it's shifted into 5 different topics and you both walk away feeling like nothing was actually resolved. Well, more than likely, the leader may have skipped one of the most important steps of the difficult conversation process. And that's preparation. See, most leaders spend more time preparing for presentations, staff meetings, board meetings, or interviews, and spend very little time preparing for a conversation that could completely impact trust, accountability, performance, and the culture. And what I've learned after years of leading teams, coaching school leaders, and supporting executives is that the most difficult conversations don't go wrong because of what happens during the conversation. They go wrong because of what didn't happen before the conversation ever got started. So by the end of this episode, you're going to understand why conversations break down, why good intentions aren't enough, and how to prepare yourself before you ever sit down with another person. Because once you change how you prepare, you'll change how you lead. So let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're a school principal, and over the last few weeks, you've completed several classroom observations for one of your teachers. And you've noticed some things, some challenges that need to be addressed. Student engagement has been inconsistent. Kids aren't really paying attention. The classroom management has slipped. It's a little chaotic in there. The transitions are taking longer than they should. You notice the teacher's spending way too much time at the bathroom with the kids. The students aren't completely meeting the learning objective during the lessons. Then you also notice that when this teacher's in collaborative planning, she's not as engaged as you would hope and want for her to be. Their parent communication has been spotty, and then deadlines are getting missed. And so naturally you're like, all right, let's schedule a meeting. Now, here's where things start to go left. And it's not because the teacher is defensive or they're resistant to feedback. The meeting goes left because you haven't taken time to prepare. You walk into the meeting carrying weeks of frustration. And because you haven't organized your thinking, everything you've been feeling starts to come out all at once, like word vomit. You start with classroom management, and then you jump to lesson planning, and then you mention collaborative planning, and then the spotty parent communication, and then you start to talk how big picture there's a lack of professionalism, and then you mention the deadlines. Now, I want you to imagine that you're the teacher sitting across the table. You come into the meeting thinking you're discussing one concern, but now you're hearing 5 or 6 different issues. You're trying to process everything that's being said. You're wondering, wait, what's the real issue here? Is this about my classroom management or the lesson plans? Is this about me meeting the deadlines or my parent communication? What are you trying to say? You don't know what the principal's trying to say. And so you naturally become overwhelmed as the teacher. Maybe you start to become defensive because you're confused. And it's not because you don't want the feedback, but it's because you don't know where to begin. Meanwhile, let's go back to being the principal. Now you're thinking, why aren't they getting this? Why are they pushing back? Why are they making excuses? And then the meeting ends. Then you, the principal, walks away frustrated because you feel like the teacher wasn't receptive. The teacher walks away discouraged because they're not even sure what success looks like for them anymore. And the part that's really heartbreaking is that both people entered the meeting wanting the same thing: growth, improvement. Then you, the principal, you really did want to help. The teacher really did want to improve, but both parties left with very different understandings because the conversation lacked clarity. And y'all, this happens every single day. And not just in schools, but in businesses, in nonprofits, in healthcare, in government. Wherever people lead people, leaders often believe difficult conversations go wrong because the other person became emotional or defensive, or that they were resistant, or because they just didn't want the feedback. But if we're honest, sometimes the conversation didn't go wrong because of the other person. Sometimes it went wrong because we as the leaders walked into the room with a head full of frustration already instead of a plan. It's a hard truth to accept, but it's one that we have to confront if we want to become better leaders. Because leadership isn't just about having the conversation. It's about preparing yourself well enough to lead the conversation effectively. So what actually happened in that meeting, in the example? Let's break it down. Because I don't think that principal lacked good intentions. I don't think they lacked the courage to even have the conversation. And I do believe that the principal from the example really had the desire to help the teacher grow. However, they skipped one of the most important parts of leadership, and that's not preparing themselves before preparing for the conversation. Yes, we have to prepare ourselves for those conversations. And I want you to hold on to that, because that's where most difficult conversations begin to unravel. It's not in the meeting, it's before the meeting. See, when leaders walk into difficult conversations, carrying frustration, carrying assumptions, disappointment, or emotion without first processing it, those emotions start to lead the conversation. Instead of leading with curiosity, instead of leading with clarity, instead of leading with intentionality. And that's when conversations start going left. Leaders start reacting instead of leading. They start talking before they fully thought through what actually needs to be addressed and said. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a conversation thinking the issue was one thing, and then before you know it, you realize halfway through the conversation that you were actually frustrated about 3 or 4 different things? Y'all, I've done it. As a principal, there were early moments in my leadership journey where I realized I wasn't just responding to what happened yesterday. I was responding to multiple weeks of accumulated frustration. The missed deadlines, the communication breakdowns, the coaching that hadn't been implemented. Frustrating. The little things I kept telling myself I'd address later. And because I hadn't slowed down enough to process what was really happening, everything came pouring out at once. And that's not leadership. That's emotional overflow. And based on what I've experienced, here's what I've learned. I've learned that just because you're frustrated, it doesn't mean that you're ready to have that difficult conversation. Let me say that again. Just because you're frustrated doesn't mean you're prepared to have that difficult conversation. Preparation isn't about rehearsing what you're going to say. Preparation is about understanding what needs to be said, why it needs to be said, and what outcome you're trying to create. That's a completely different mindset. The goal of a difficult conversation isn't simply to address the problem. The goal is to create clarity. The goal is to strengthen trust. The goal is to help someone grow. And the goal is to move the relationship forward and the work forward. And if that's your goal, then the first conversation you need to have isn't with the other person. It's with yourself. That's exactly why I created the Think framework. It helps leaders to have that conversation with themselves. It's not a script for difficult conversations, But it's a leadership tool that helps you slow down before you speak. Because before you can lead someone else through a difficult conversation, you first have to lead yourself. Think is the work you do internally. It helps you separate facts from feelings, assumptions from observations, reaction from intentional leadership. And when you do that, you show up to the conversation as a leader who's prepared, not just emotionally charged. That is really important. So let's walk through the think framework together. And I want you to remember, think is not the conversation that you're going to have. That's not what you're planning. The think process is what happens before the conversation. It's how you prepare yourself as a leader. Because if you don't lead yourself first, it's going to be really difficult to lead someone else through a difficult conversation. So let's go back to our principle. Instead of walking into that meeting carrying weeks of frustration, what if they had paused first? The T in think stands for take a step back. Before reacting, before scheduling the meeting, before deciding what to say, pause and ask yourself, what is really happening here? Not, what am I frustrated about? But, what are the facts? What assumptions am I making? What emotions are influencing the way I'm seeing the situation? Maybe the issue isn't that the teacher doesn't care. Maybe the issue is inconsistent planning. Maybe the issue is a lack of instructional support. Maybe the issue is something completely different than the story you've been telling yourself. That's why I always say distance creates perspective. Sometimes we need to take a step back before we step in. Now, the H stands for honor the human. This is where empathy comes in. Ask yourself, how might this teacher be experiencing this situation? What pressures might they be carrying? What perspective am I missing? What support might they actually need? Notice, I'm not saying to excuse the behavior. I'm saying seek to understand it first. Because empathy does not remove accountability. I need more people to understand that. Empathy helps us deliver accountability in a way that people can actually receive it. So now let's go to I. Identify the outcome. This is one of the biggest mistakes leaders make because they walk into these conversations knowing what they're frustrated about, but they haven't defined what success actually looks like. So ask yourself, what result am I trying to achieve? Is my goal to vent, or is my goal to help this person grow? Am I trying to prove a point or create progress? Because clarity creates that alignment. And if you're not clear on the destination, the conversation will wander. Then comes the N. Navigate the options. Before you decide there's only one way to handle this situation, slow down and ask yourself, what options do I have? Is this a coaching conversation? Is this a clarification conversation? Is this a performance conversation? Could the issue be addressed over time instead of trying to solve everything in one meeting? Remember our principle. Maybe the classroom management is the priority today. Maybe the lesson planning can be coached next week. Professional communication can be addressed during the next one-on-one. You don't have to solve 5 problems in one conversation. In fact, trying to solve everything usually means nothing gets solved. And then finally, you have the K. The K stands for keep moving forward. Leadership requires movement. After you've processed the situation, after you've considered the people involved, and after you've clarified your desired outcome, ask yourself, what's my next best step? Maybe the next best step is scheduling the conversation. Maybe it's gathering more information. Maybe it's asking a few clarifying questions before making assumptions. Or maybe it's realizing you're not ready to have the conversation yet, and that's okay. Because thoughtful leadership is not slow leadership, it's intentional leadership. And so now that you've walked yourself through the think framework, you're ready for the next step. And this is where I want to make an important distinction. The think framework prepares you. It helps you regulate your emotions, challenge your assumptions, clarify your thinking. But once you've done that internal work, you still need to prepare the conversation itself. And that's exactly why I have my Balanced Leadership Difficult Conversation Clarity Guide. Y'all, the Clarity Guide helps you to organize what needs to be communicated. It helps you define the issue, the desired outcome, because your attempt to balance empathy and accountability is going to be hinged on your successful planning. It also helps you to identify the commitments that need to come from this conversation. So think about it like this. Think prepares the leader. The Balanced Leadership Difficult Conversation Clarity Guide prepares the conversation. And when you use both, you stop walking into difficult conversations hoping they go well. And you start walking in them prepared to lead them well. So let me leave you with this. Imagine if we replayed that meeting between the principal and the teacher. Only this time, the principal doesn't walk into the meeting carrying weeks of frustration. Instead, they slow down. They walk themselves through the think framework, and they separate the facts from the assumptions. They identify one issue that needs to be addressed first. They think about how the teacher might experience the conversation. They define the outcome they want, and then instead of hoping the conversation goes well, they prepare for it. They use the Balanced Leadership Difficult Conversation Clarity Guide. And guess what? The conversation goes well because they identify the actual issue. They think through why it matters. They determine how they'll balance empathy and accountability throughout the conversation. They define the commitment they're asking the teacher to make moving forward. Now, imagine that conversation. Instead of discussing 6 different issues, they focus on one. Instead of leaving the teacher overwhelmed, they leave them with clarity. Instead of both people walking away with different interpretations, they leave with shared understanding. And isn't that what we're really after? Not perfect conversations, not comfortable conversations, but clear conversations. Those clear conversations build stronger relationships. Those clear conversations strengthen accountability. Those clear conversations build trust. And they create healthier cultures. That's what balanced leadership is all about. Balancing empathy with accountability to produce meaningful results. So here's what I want you to do this week. I want you to think about one difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's with someone on your team. Maybe it's with your manager. Maybe it's with a colleague. Maybe it's even a conversation you've been needing to have with yourself. And so before you send that calendar invite for that meeting, before you walk into the office, before you rehearse what you're going to say, pause, walk yourself through the think framework, take a step back, honor the human, identify the outcome, navigate the options, and keep moving forward. That's the think framework. You lead yourself first, right? Then you prepare the conversation. Pull out that Balanced Leadership Difficult Conversation Clarity Guide. Get clear on the issue. Get clear on the outcome. Get clear on how you'll balance empathy and accountability. Because when you prepare intentionally, you communicate differently. And when you communicate differently, your team responds differently and in a positive way. So here's the key takeaway I want you to remember from today's episode. The most difficult conversations don't go wrong because people are difficult. They go wrong because leaders try to improvise conversations that require intentional preparation. Preparation creates that clarity that we're all striving for. And that clarity creates confidence. And that confidence creates courageous leadership. And courageous leadership builds healthy teams. If today's conversation challenged you, or if you're realizing there's a conversation that you've been putting off, I don't want you to walk into it unprepared. Message me clarity, and I will send you my Balanced Leadership Difficult Conversation Clarity Guide and my Think Framework. These are the tools I designed to help leaders prepare for difficult conversations, to be able to lead them with confidence, empathy, and accountability. And you'll also receive my weekly wrap-up routine, because leadership doesn't just happen in isolated moments. It's built through intentional habits that help you reflect, reset, and lead with purpose week after week. And if this episode made you think of another leader who's carrying around a conversation that they need to have, share this episode with them. Because the more honest we become about real leadership, the better leaders we'll all become. If you're enjoying these leadership in real life moments, I need you to make sure you are subscribed to Balanced Leadership with H-Monét so you can never miss an episode. And until next time, remember, lead with heart, lead with strategy, and let's build a leadership that lasts. Peace. I'll see you next week.